Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me are the writer and broadcaster Vicky Beeching and James Lyons from The Mirror. So let's start with those front pages. Well, we'll begin with the Telegraph. It's leading with Labour's plans to apparently cap spending on the state pension. The Guardian has its exclusive on the whistleblower who leaked details of the allegations regarding US surveillance programmes. The Daily Mail's front cover discusses online child pornography. The Times is leading with a story on an Irish bailout. The Daily Mirror speaks to the violinist who threw eggs at Simon Cowell on Britain's Got Talent. The Eye's front page takes a look at Birmingham's bid to build the UK's busiest airport. The Independent's front cover discusses the victims of sex grooming gangs. And The Sun's also leading with the Britain's Got Talent story. So let's make a start then, and we'll begin with the Guardian, because they're really on a roll at the moment, aren't they, with this story. It just unravels every day, and now we've got this interview with the man who's asked to be identified following that interview that he's conducted for the Guardian while in hiding in Hong Kong. Edward Snowden, who's 29 and very sanguine, it seems, about the kind of future he might have, having chosen to waive his right to anonymity, Vicky. Yes, well, he's saying here that he knows full well what awaits him in sort of stepping up and identifying himself, and it says that he had a very comfortable life, living in Hawaii, a massive salary. He's got a very happy relationship with his girlfriend. There's a lot of sacrifice here, and he's aware of the cost that it will require, but basically he's a man of conscience. I have a lot of respect for him, and he's saying he's seen things that just aren't acceptable, and he doesn't want to live in a world where heavy surveillance happens, so he's speaking out. We don't know at the moment, James, how much of what he's alleging is true, but there don't seem to have been any denials from the United States that it's false. They're just cross about it.
They are. I'd say they're a little more than cross, actually. They're livid.
British understatement, if you don't mind.
No, they have. I mean, obviously, you've seen this here with William Hague today in the interviews he's given. They want to be very careful on both sides of the Atlantic about saying exactly, not getting into saying exactly what they do and don't do. But there's certainly no suggestion that what he's talking about is anything other than the truth. Quite how wise he is to reveal it is obviously a more contentious matter and up for debate.
If this is going on, and if Britain is sort of using any of it for its own advantage, kind of renders the communications data bill that the government was trying to bring to the Houses of Parliament rather pointless, doesn't it?
That certainly will get everybody's hackles up about snooping, and I think there is a genuine fear that the more we put ourselves out there on the internet, the more at risk we are to this sense of Big Brother. And I liked what William Hague said. I mean, he was very reassuring in his interviews today. And then Obama also has said, you can't have complete protection and complete privacy. So it is a fine line, but I think there are lots of kind of fears rising up about just how much we're being watched. I noticed it says about Edward Snowden when he's in his hotel room at the moment, that even when he enters in his passwords, he's putting a hood over his head, he's covering things up on his laptop. So he's obviously very in the know about different surveillance techniques that they have, even through your own machine and your webcam or your phone. So it's pretty sinister, and like I said at 10:30, it reminds me of George Orwell's 1984 becoming a reality today.
The thing is, when I first read this story, James, I thought, well, yeah, spies are spying.
Yes.
Are we surprised? Doing their
We're
job?
not. I mean, there is an argument, as we were saying earlier on, that actually we should be delighted at this kind of coverage. You look at the threats that are out there, the terrible events in Woolwich and all the rest of it. What I don't find tremendously reassuring, though, is when you have the Foreign Secretary saying, well, if you are innocent, you've got nothing to fear, because I think that's certainly not always been the case. People's experience of the security services.
I'm still not quite clear on. I understand that the metadata, who's emailing whom or texting or calling, and where they are when they do it and how long the calls last, that's collected. But it's the content of what people are saying to each other.
Allegedly not. I mean, that's what William Hague was saying today, that it's not. But from what Edward Snowden's saying, it doesn't sound like that's the case in the US. And
be hugely if you're going to go to that trouble, it'd be hugely tempting to have a look at what people are actually saying.
Too as well, but perhaps not on quite such a wide scale. I think you need a separate level of authorisation for that. What this is talking about is people compare it to the sort of looking at the envelope of a letter, and you can see where it was posted, when it was posted and who it's going to, and in this case obviously as well who posted it, but you can't actually read the contents inside.
Well, this is just going to run and run, isn't it? Because the Foreign Secretary is going to have to make a statement tomorrow. I mean, we're going pressure on Theresa May as well, do you think, Jane?
Well, I think you'll probably see the Foreign Secretary stand up and say he can't say anything about it because it's all secret.
That's what he said today, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It is tricky. I mean, the reality is that most of these people wouldn't have time to bother looking at what we've sent on Gmail or the messages we send on Facebook, but I think it's the principle that counts, isn't it? And
how see them if they do. I mean, God,
it's just how safe we feel. The more and more we give away, and we are being asked for more and more information. I don't know about you, but sometimes things like Facebook, when they preempt with adverts, you sort of go, gosh, I'm really interested in that. That's because I've clicked on this, that and the other in the last month. It's really getting to the point now where these sites know so much about us and our preferences that it is slightly frightening.
I would just say, I mean, he's talking here obviously about the huge sort of data harvesting that's going on. But actually, if you look at the figures, I think the figures that the Guardian themselves have come up with are there's only 197 Britons involved, which I know it sounds, it's nearly 200, but given the scale of the terrorist threat, considering there's sort of 4,000 known suspects in Britain, that's pretty small.
Yes, it is tiny. We'll wait to hear what he says anyway when he comes before the House. Let's move on to the Times. A couple of stories we'll look at here. The first one, the lead is the Irish bailout cost British taxpayers an extra £10 billion. Backdoor deal to cover losses of RBS subsidiary. An arrangement that the paper says it can reveal was never explicitly approved by Parliament. So how's it come about?
Well, I think from what I can tell of this story, we haven't actually all accidentally spent an extra 10 billion propping up banks. It's what the Times seems to be saying is that 10 billion of what we've already put into RBS has ended up in this offshoot called Ulster Bank, which operates primarily in the Irish Republic. Apparently it's the third largest lender there. Now the point that the Times are making is that this wasn't specifically authorised in Parliament, unlike the £3.25 billion direct loan that we gave the Irish to prop them up. And they're suggesting this is essentially a backdoor way of channeling money in to support the Irish government.
But you wonder what the sort of provisos were when RBS got this money. Was it made clear to all of us how it had to be used?
I guess this story is implying not, but it depends what their parameters were and whether they feel like they've done anything wrong. I think the concern the paper's raising here is about accountability, just asking whether or not there is complete transparency and accountability to Parliament and the British public about these kinds of bailouts. I
think we have to remember when we read things like this, when the bailout was done for RBS, the banks were 24 hours away from not having any money in the cash points. This was necessarily a cobbled together and hasty deal. But what's quite interesting here is that there's an unnamed minister, a Tory minister, admitting that the current government have missed a trick, because this is something they should have spotted when they agreed the bilateral loan in 2010 and said, oi, we think you should take on responsibility for this loan book.
Let's look at the main picture story at the Times now. Ian Banks, who's died at the age of 59, and he talked about the irony of his most recent book, which is to be published very soon, about a man in his 40s dying of cancer, and he started writing that book before he'd been diagnosed himself.
Yeah, it's such a sad story. He announced on the 3rd of April that he knew he had about a year to live, possibly less, but I don't think anybody expected that we'd hear the announcement of his death. Such an amazing writer. He's a sci-fi writer, so he appeals to me because I'm a complete geek and I love sci-fi stuff. I love also his backstory is that he decided at the age of 11 that he'd be a writer, and he finished his first novel at only 16, and then he wrote one novel a year. And I think that's just such an impressive legacy to leave.
It is, and it was lovely to hear that he was touched by that public outpouring when he announced that he was.
Yeah, he had no idea how many lives he touched, and I found myself, I didn't like the sci-fi. Well, I didn't read the sci-fi myself, but the novels are absolutely, I thought none of them were brilliant.
Yeah, quite extraordinary, very dark.
I mean, he was a big whiskey lover as well, and I think I'll have to have a wee dram when I get home tonight.
In his honour, right?
In his honour. Why not? He'd approve of that, James. He really would, I'm sure. The Daily Telegraph. Labour plan to cap state pension is the headline on the Telegraph. This is apparently what Ed Balls has promised to do, triggering, it says, a fierce debate about whether the elderly should be protected from cuts. I mean, there is this triple lock in at the moment, isn't it? Which the coalition, which means the coalition has to allow the state pension, the basic state pension, to rise by a certain amount, and
it's at least 2.5%.
yes,
a year.
and politicians are powerless to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
But it's such a huge part of the welfare outlay, isn't it? State pensions. That you can't blame politicians for having a look at how it operates. It
does overshadow the rest of the budget. Yeah, it's vast sums. I think it was 110 billion out of 166 billion of the welfare budget. But of course, you know, as soon as you talk about things, you're playing with fire. Now, I don't think that Ed Balls meant to say that he was going to in any way cap the state pension today. Aides have certainly been out trying to say that's not what he meant afterwards. But you know, the headlines like this will generate a huge amount of anger.
And but it kind of puts the Labour Party on the back foot again when they were trying to sort of show how they were going to tackle welfare.
I know, and it's a dangerous thing, like we were saying earlier. Once you start messing with that demographic, they are such faithful voters, and you start tampering with that, and you just wonder how it's going to affect people's loyalty. But like James said, the percentage spent on pensions is so vast that if we're really going to tackle the budget problems, we have to start there.
Let's look at just quickly at the picture story. Rafael Nadal winning the French Open for the 8th time. It's the first time that a man has won the same Grand Slam tournament for an 8th time, and he's still only 27. You just think that, you know, records surely can't be broken for much longer, and then along he comes.
Sickening, isn't it?
Isn't it?
For those
It's incredible.
Struggle to take any form of exercise.
Yeah.
It's an astonishing picture as well. It's great. It looks like it almost looks like an advert, one of these new adverts for a very well-known orange brand of drink.
It's been tangoed, right?
Yeah, they might.
I was trying to avoid the.
Yes, remember where you are,
Well,
Vicky. You know,
I have no sponsor affiliation. I actually don't like tango, so
other soft drinks are available.
They are.
The Daily Mail. Only 1 in 15 online child porn suspects is arrested, and we've had David Cameron saying that he's sickened by the spread of child pornography. And it's time for firms such as Google to stop making excuses. I mean, given the number of people who are actually suspects, for so few of them to be detained is quite shocking, isn't it?
It is, and I think it sets a precedent. You see figures like this, and it must lessen the deterrent on people that are engaging in it. So I think, like the NSPCC said, offenders should feel the full force of the law, and I think this particular form of activity should really be stamped out, because it's involving vulnerable children. It's terrible.
It's so, and there was the teacher as well who was allowed to go back to work even though he received a caution for downloading images.
Yeah, he hasn't been banned from the classroom, I think was the distinction, and apparently there have been others as well.
Yes, in theory he was not going to be prevented from going back to work.
I know the government are now bringing forward new guidelines on that, but they won't affect those cases. They're basically slamming the door after the horse is bolted. I mean, the appalling thing, as we mentioned earlier on, is the fact that apparently some chief constables see this stuff as a low priority, which I think you know, anyone in their right mind would just think is unreal.
Let's look at the Independent. MPs. Authorities are still failing victims of sex grooming gangs. The report says the errors in Rochdale and Rotherham cases were inexcusable. It's such an enormous problem, though. I mean, I remember I heard a documentary, I think it was on Radio 4, of you know, just how many vulnerable girls particularly are out there just in the Rochdale area, and social workers really push to try to sort of keep them safe.
Yeah, I think I heard the same documentary. It's just so sad. It's saying here that basically it's a postcode lottery when it comes to young people's safety, and it just shouldn't be. We should be able to have a kind of even system of justice across the country. Nobody should be at risk or vulnerable any more so than anyone else.
Well, I was reading this report earlier on today, and one of the things, it's from the Home Affairs Select Committee, a group of MPs in Parliament, and one of the things they're saying is that despite all the horrendous cases that we've heard from Rochdale, Rotherham, Oxford, there's still this culture, if you like, that often sees the victims as sort of bad girls, or you know, in some way to blame for what's happened to them.
It's certainly how they see themselves.
It's so difficult. I mean, I know that they're suggesting there should be a new law which would force people to report abuse, but unless you can get police, social services and others to act on it, you know, all the laws in the world are not going to help.
No, they're saying here also that authorities don't routinely interview young people who run away from children's homes. So once you're in a children's home, you're instantly more vulnerable. You run away from there, you become even more vulnerable. It's kind of a slippery slope into ending up in these terrible situations.
Mandela, a nation holds its breath once more. The 94-year-old former president back in hospital from this recurring lung infection, and South Africans obviously hoping for him to make a recovery, but the eyes of the world on South Africa again. It was only weeks ago, wasn't it?
We have to remember, that he is 94, and I think there has been almost a change of tone in South Africa this time round. I mean, friends of his saying it's time to let him go, which is a extraordinary thing to say, but given all that he's achieved. But.
Yes, I mean, to say somebody's breathing on his own, if that's all you can say about his health, he's in a poor old way. Yeah. Finally, a bit of a handbrake turn, I'm afraid. The Daily Mirror. James, the Daily Mirror. She's 2 eggs short of an omelette. This is the contestant, Natalie Holt, a viola player, who's thrown eggs at Simon Cowell, protesting against his dreadful influence on music. Here he is again. He's whether he's the victim or whatever in this. Simon Cowell managed to get his programme on the front page of a national paper again.
I wondered, honestly, I mean, they're saying at least it shows you that it's live, but James and I were chatting about this beforehand, and we both have suspicions that maybe it was a stunt, maybe he was in on it. He's not pressing any charges.
I think Cowell's missed a trick here. I mean, he could have had his Prescott moment, confounded the expectations, just turned round. Maybe it wouldn't quite so well with a woman, but...
no, it wouldn't.
It does seem a bit suspicious, though, how she managed to, have a box of eggs.
Got a very good aim, clearly, and nobody watching her very closely what she was carrying on on the stage. That's the papers for tonight. Thank you to Vicky and to James for coming in and talking us through the front pages. Coming up next, the film review with Gavin Esler and Mark Kermode.